Good morning. I'm Craig Maude, and I am exhausted. I'm really tired. How many of you out here today are a little bit worn down? Psychically, physically, existentially? Anyone here a little bit existentially tired? Just let out a soft sigh if you're existentially tired. Yeah. It's a weird time to be alive. We are processing a lot of information every day. It's kind of crazy how much information we are absorbing every day. Sometimes it's so crazy and I'm so overwhelmed, I'll be sitting in a cafe and I'll just close my laptop and I'll look around and I'll go, okay, I'm pretty sure everyone took a shower and put on clothes today. We're doing all right. That's my baseline. That's how crazy things are. That if everyone takes a shower and puts on their clothes, things are okay. So it's a weird moment in time, and I think there are a couple ways to respond to this sense of overwhelming information and information overload. And one is to go to a cave. That is, like, literally just move to a cave and microdose LSD and disappear from the world and just sort of live out and say, I'm going to be a Luddite and I'm not going to touch technology ever again. I'm never going to use my smartphone. I'm done. I don't think that's that interesting of a way to respond. I believe in technology. I love technology. I grew up with all sorts of technology. As they said on IRC when I was 13, I was making ANSI art. Anyone here know what ANSI art is? Yeah, ANSI art. And I believe in the power of technology. And I also think that going forward, we are not going to see a decrease in the density of information that we have to process every day. So, the past 9 years, I have come up with a couple of guidelines, of two, that have helped me deal with this information overload sense. First is establish boundaries, physical or psychic, around communication channels. And then the second is design the way you work with tools instead of allowing tools to dictate how you live or how you work or how you design. Seems very simple. And I'm going to tell you today the story of two moments in my life where I was just flat out empty, exhausted to the bone. And I responded in part to that exhaustion by making books. This is kind of my therapy. It's an act of palliative care. Try to get over that exhaustion. And my hope is that these books can provide archetypes, however odd they may be, and they're kind of weird, and these projects are a little bit strange. They may or may not relate to your everyday work, but I hope they provide some archetypes around these guidelines of boundaries and tool use. So, first exhaustion. First exhaustion happened about 9 years ago, and it was an exhaustion of output. Just too much output. And I was working on the Flipboard for iPhone team. It was very early on in the startup. It was a very small team. And I have to add a footnote here. We had an intern. He was very young, extremely young intern, but very wise. It's kind of strange. He's very kind, sort of like a mix between the Dalai Lama and Yoda. And everyone in the office would whisper and say, that intern seems like he's going to make something of himself someday. And his name was Dylan Field. So Dylan was our intern, and I took Dylan under my wing, and I taught him everything I knew about macromedia fireworks. And that's why Dylan founded Figma. So we're 9 months into building the Flipboard for iPhone product, and we're all really tired. The whole team's exhausted. And I'm trying to figure out why I'm exhausted. Where is this exhaustion coming from? Because I think it's important. I think this sense of exhaustion is pervasive, and I think because it's pervasive in society, it is worthy of attention. And so I was trying to figure out, what is it that's really getting to me? And I realized we had been producing and running so fast over the last 9 months. And all of the stuff we produced was just sitting in folders. And a folder with one item in it feels the same as a folder with a billion items in it. And I think this is one of the problems of working in digital space, is having an understanding of the boundaries of the actual completeness of what you've worked on can be really, really difficult. So, like I said, personal therapy, I made a book. I did it secretly. I didn't tell anyone in the office I was making this book. I just needed to kind of help myself feel better and feel more grounded. So I made this. 2 copies, 1 foot by 1 foot, 300 pages, 6 kilograms. I printed it actually just down the road with Blurb, who's an actually really cool print-on-demand company. And just being able to make 1 or 2 books in the world is kind of a miracle. We forget that 30 years ago, making 1 book of this size would have been unthinkable. And to do it really quickly, even more unthinkable. And on the cover of the book, I put the first Git commit. First hack of iPhone version of Flipboard, currently hard-coded to show the FlipTech feed, Saturday, February 19th, 2011, 9:35 p.m. And we talk about digital stuff as not being intimate. And to me, this is almost too intimate. 9:30 on a Saturday night. Why are you programming Flipboard? That's just what we did in Silicon Valley in 2011. And then on the back, we have the last commit, equally suggestive of something, perhaps overworking ourselves. December 1st, 2011, 4:47 a.m. Working all through the night, multiple nights, and then the last push, like Indiana Jones grabbing his hat to get it into the App Store. Woof, we made it. We hit the deadline. And then the book itself, I took all of the design comps we had made over the last 9 months, and I just laid them out from the very first comp all the way through. All of the weird permutations we went through, the UI, UX sketches, the actual sketches from sketchbooks, the typographic grids that we were using. And what's interesting is that when you shift mediums, so you go from this folder of just a list of images to a medium of print, and this is 2 feet by 1 foot, really high resolution. This is an incredible screen. And you put these 12 comps out in a row. I did it chronologically just to save time and to make it easy. But what's interesting is that you look at this, and the first reaction to this screen is that, oh, it's all the same thing. But then you look more closely, and you realize how much micro-typographic iteration was going on throughout the process, and this is really hard to remember sometimes. So immediately, I was getting some value out of this. And of course, an app is not just design, it is commits. And we had about 10,000 of them, so I laid out 10,000 commits. 3.5, and what's interesting about the 30,000-foot view of commits is that commits and commit messages begin to take on a texture all their own. And so as new engineers would join the project or would leave, the very texture of these pages, it was about 80 pages of this, the very texture of these pages would start to shift and shimmy, and you could kind of see where and when people came and left. So I had this book. We launched the product, it went really well. We were having a meeting after the launch, about 12 of us on the team. We were sitting around a table, and I said, hey, I got a gift for everyone. And they were like, ooh, Godiva chocolates? I was like, no. A big, boring white book. Boom. And they're like, what's that? And so we opened it up, and you could feel as we started to turn the pages, the air in the room shifted. It was very weird. It's almost paranormal. There was this stress that was suddenly let out of the space. People started crying. I mean, we were really tired. And I thought, okay, this is good. This is useful. This is the value of this thing. Great. This is, I give 1 to the team. I keep 1 for myself. And what was interesting is that as time has passed, right? It's been 9 years now. As time has passed, the value of this book has only increased because we can't go back in time the way we develop software today. You can only ever touch the latest version of an app in the App Store or a web project. If I want to go use the 2011 version of Flipboard, you just can't. The API endpoints aren't going to work. Phone screen sizes are all different. It's just not going to function. So the only way to touch that work that we did is to go to this book. Now, I'm not saying that everyone, for every product you ever make, you should make a book. Although it would be kind of cool, right? Imagine if you could go to Apple, and Apple had the Apple Library. And inside the Apple Library, it was like 10,000 books of every single app ever made for the Mac or iOS. That would be probably a genuinely useful resource to go back in time and look at Mac Paint from the 80s. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is we can embed more moments into the process of producing an app, working on a project, to think about what is it that we've built, that we're building. In other words, to just have a little more self-awareness. And I think I made this book at the end of the process, and I really wish that we had had more touch points going through it, where we had these moments of self-reflection. There probably would have been less crying when I revealed the book. Also, by creating an artifact, you're giving shape to your work. And this is important because your mind will absolutely lie to you later. You will misremember. You'll forget the bad stuff, you'll remember some of the good stuff, but you'll miss all the important details. And so having this artifact that future designers and future folks can come into and reference and remember and reflect on the work that you've done, I think is really important. So that was the first exhaustion. Second exhaustion. This is about 15 months ago. I was exhausted by too many inputs. I just had too much information coming into my life, and I felt really overwhelmed. And I thought, how can I design both a tool and an experience that allows me to be present in the world, but also connect with my community in meaningful ways? Now, I have to give you a little bit of background before I explain this project. For the last 6 years, I've been doing a lot of walking in Japan. It started off, I've been living in Japan for the last 20 years or so. That's another important point. For the last 6 years, lots of walking in Japan. It started off kind of as just a hobby with some friends, but it grew into this obsession. I'm inviting artists and writers and photographers and entrepreneurs from around the world over, and we go on walks, sometimes for an afternoon, sometimes for 2 days, 3 days, 8 days, 2 weeks. Sometimes it's a group of 10. I've done so much walking now that local governments have hired me to consult with them about tourism and walking. Walking in Japan has become a core part of my identity, sort of unplanned. It's a big part of my life. And the more I've walked, the more I've realized that a walk itself is a tool. I mean, this is kind of obvious and kind of not obvious, but a walk can be a platform. And I started thinking about how to use walks as platforms. And one of the ways I've used it is that I have my newsletters. So I publish to tens of thousands of people every month about walking, which is a really strange thing. I did not think so many people were going to be into walking. Turns out, lots of people are really, really into walking. And the more I've walked, the more I've thought, where does it go? You go on these incredible walks with folks, you spend days together, you have amazing conversations, and then it kind of just dissipates. So I started looking through the history of what people have done with their walks. You have things like Martha Gellhorn and her book Travels with Myself and Another that chronicles her journey in Africa alone in the mid-20th century. It's a pretty incredible book. It's hilarious. It's amazing. So classically, put your walk, put your adventure in a book. Laurie Lee, As I Walked Out One Midsummer Morning, left his house in England, got on a boat, got off in Spain, walked from Porto to the other side of Spain as the Spanish Civil War broke out. It's an incredible, hilarious, well-observed book. Unbeaten Tracks in Japan, Isabella Bird. Late 1800s, this British woman goes to Japan just as the Meiji Restoration is happening, and she travels around Japan on her own and writes a hilarious account of it. So books, very classic way to give shape to a walk or an adventure. 1927, the artist Oskar Fischinger wanted to capture his walk from Munich to Berlin. So he took a video camera and used it as basically a stop-motion film camera. Richard Long, in 1967, used a walk as a literal tool to make this line. This is called a line made by walking. Just walk back and forth. Most recently, just a few months ago, a Japanese designer and developer named Inasa Fujio started working on a project that has captured the attention of at least Reddit and also other parts of the internet. But he's making a video game where all you do is walk around countryside Japan. That's it. And what's amazing about it is it's not photorealistic, but he has captured the textures, the light, The details, like the way the concrete on this wall looks, the moss on the ground, the shape of the shrubbery, this staircase and how it's not perfectly straight going up. This is the closest I've ever seen anyone or anything get to walking in Japan without actually walking in Japan. It's amazing. I hope that this is available for VR for everyone soon. And the more I've looked at the work that everyone's done, the more I realize that to walk, to really move through a place and be present, is to apply this rigor of process of knowing a place. And I find that to be really inspiring. So 15 months ago, I was really tired, too many inputs, and I wanted to get to know Japan even more deeply than I had up until that point. So I decided to go on a really big walk. And I carved this time out in my life. I made plans about 6 months in advance to do this giant walk. I started in my hometown, my home south of Tokyo, walked up to Tokyo, up through the plains, the Kisoji, down through Nagano into the Gifu Plains, and then around Lake Biwako, down to Kyoto. And then I kept walking on past this, but this is the main bit. This is called the Nakasendo. It's an ancient Japanese highway. In total, I walked about 1,000 kilometers for 43 days. I published 25 SMSs. Going to talk about that in a second. And I recorded about 10 hours of audio. So it was very productive. And the question I had that both inspired the walk and the walk inspired was, how do I share all of this while still being present? Because, like I said, I don't want to be in a cave. I don't want to be a cave person. And I like Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok and all of those things. But they all suffer from the same problem, which is you have to look at them to create in them. You have to gaze upon the content abyss of a timeline in order to make something. And I don't know about you, but I can't resist. I get sucked in. The comments are there, they're coming in real time. It's all very distracting for me, and I get overwhelmed. And I find oftentimes I forget what I was even there to do in the first place. So I made a tool. I worked with developers Josh Miller, Hirsch Argwal, and Josh Lee in New York, and we made an SMS publishing tool. Because we were sort of chatting about what are underused spaces on the phone that are intimate, but no one really uses for experiments or publishing. And so we thought SMS was kind of a fun, undertapped area. And you subscribe to my walk. So I told all my newsletter people, I said, hey, you can subscribe to the walk by texting walk to this number. Everyone, you're going to be deleted when the walk is done. Don't worry. You're not going to get SMSs from me for the end of time, just about 25 days. I didn't know how many subscribed. I didn't want to know the numbers. That was kind of part of it. I didn't want to have any sense of what was going on in the background. The responses, I told everyone you can respond over SMS, but I won't see it immediately. They'll be stored on the server. And then a physical book will be automatically generated, i.e. I'll make InDesign templates. It will be automatically generated. And then when I get back from my walk, my diary entries and photos and everyone's responses will be there in that book waiting for me at home. We'll make one copy of it. That's it. And really what this project was contending with is this tension between real-time and asynchronous communication. And it's not to say real-time is good, asynchronous is bad, real-time is bad. They're two different tools. And I think oftentimes we may over-index for the value of real-time when actually what we want and the higher fidelity of communication comes from asynchronicity. And I think this project kind of hit on that. And the last thing before I get into the actual walk is that when you think of a walk as a platform, so it's like an operating system. Like a walk is like Mac OS. And you can build software on top of a platform. And so my software for the walk was defined by these rules. No media, so no news, no magazines, no articles, no social networks, no podcasts. The thing that is so powerful about a smartphone is it's a teleportation device. And it's great when you're in a place you don't want to be. So you're commuting on the train, it's smelly, it's tough, you're tired, you just don't want to be there. You can put on a podcast, listen to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, and you're not there anymore. That's amazing. I didn't want to experience that. My other rule is I had to consolidate everything I was collecting every day. So data about the walk, photos. I was taking hundreds of photos a day, recording audio every day. I had to publish one SMS a night. So that was my moment at night, at the inn, when I was done with the walk for the day, consolidate everything, and then publish one thing to the SMS system. And I had another rule, which was to shoot someone's portrait before 10 a.m. every morning. I had to do that. And that was a really powerful rule, actually. And this is the funny things about rules, is like no one was gonna, come after me if I didn't shoot someone's portrait before 10 in the morning. But it would be, 9:45, and I go, oh man, it's about to be 10, I gotta shoot someone's portrait. And I would just pop into places. So like I popped into this cafe, and I met these two sisters who took over this amazing cafe. They were running a flower shop next door, and the owner of this cafe passed away. He was 85 years old. He just suddenly passed away. And this was an incredible community hub. And no one in his family had the time to run the cafe. And so these two sisters said, all right, we'll take your cafe over for you. I popped into this third-generation tatami shop in the middle of nowhere because it was 9:55 and I was getting really anxious. And you walk in and they're very suspicious. Who are you and why are you here? You're literally the first foreigner to ever walk into this tatami shop. He started talking to him. I can speak Japanese. And by the end of it, you ask if you can take their portrait, and then they don't want you to leave. This farmer was definitely drunk. I don't know. It was 9:30 in the morning. I like this guy. He was just watering his lawn. We had a wonderful chat about his town, which was a kind of a famous onsen village, hot spring village. This guy was covered in blood. I asked no questions. He really wanted to talk. And so we did. We talked for about a half an hour. And this road that he's standing on is the historic road, and he's been farming next to it for his entire life. And already a few days into this walk, I realized I was having more connections. I was meeting more people. I was feeling a deeper sense of presence than I had in any of the other walks I had done up until that point. And another thing I noticed, and you've probably noticed, is everyone is really old, for the most part. Very, very old. And this is something you hear a lot about Japan, aging population. What's going to happen? Japan is some of the oldest, in terms of average, population in the world. Over 65 people are just, it's expanding at a rate that's kind of difficult to comprehend. And if you visit Tokyo or Osaka or Kyoto or Fukuoka or even Kanazawa, your perception of Japan might be that, oh, everyone's young because all the young people from the countryside go to the cities. But then when you walk and you apply that rigor of process to the countryside, and you are forced to contend with everything you are walking past because you're present, you're not teleporting somewhere else, you're forced to contend with the fact that everyone you're passing is really old. And I found that to be powerful. It's this difference between reading or seeing something and viscerally experiencing it every day, hours and hours on end each day. There's an amazing photographer, Shiho Fukuda, who's done an incredible series of portraits of elderly women in Japan who got themselves arrested because life in prison was a higher quality of life than being alone in the countryside. And I had seen these photos before, and they never really made sense to me until I was walking through some of these villages. But because I had this system in place, and I knew that at night I was going to be publishing, I was also just so curious about the stories of everyone. Because I was like, is this what I want to tell to the... I didn't know how many people were out there. 2 people subscribed to the SMS thing, or 200, 2,000? I didn't know. So I met people like Yamaguchi-san, who is retired. He collects his pension, but he also traps deer. He traps 100 deer a year. And in fact, I was walking down this road, and he sort of emerged from the forest. Like, you know that gif with Homer Simpson coming out of the bush? That's Yamaguchi-san. He scared the hell out of me. He's like, hello, hi, I'm trapping deer. And he knew the owner of the inn I was staying at. He's like, oh, tell him I said hello. But meeting people like Yamaguchi-san, or meeting these tomato farmers in this kind of David Lynchian diner in the middle of nowhere. And these guys, they weren't working this day, but they were still wearing their jumpsuits. And I said, can I take your portrait? And he said, yeah, but you got to make us famous. I said, and this guy on the left actually said, put me in the New York Times. I said, all right, what's your name? And he says, Tomato Farmer. There you go, Tomato Farmer, you're on a live stream. Or Mama, who was just the most amazing, beautiful, gentle, lightest soul of the whole walk, 83 years old, skis. How many times a year do you think she skis? How many people think less than 5 times a year? 120 times. Very close, 30. She skis 30 times a year. She's been running this cafe for 50 years. We talked for about 4 hours. And so I had all these experiences, and I was publishing to this SMS thing at night, which was kind of like yelling into a black hole, which was really freeing, actually. It was kind of an amazing experience as a creator because I didn't feel any tension. I didn't feel anything about it being performative. Nothing was coming back in real time. And I got home from the walk, and the book was waiting for me. And it was kind of moving. And it had more than 25 pages in it. I thought maybe it was just going to be my little photos or whatever. It's about 80 pages of responses. There were a lot of people responding. And they sent little photos of their own, and they sent their own messages. And on the left is my photo, and on the top right there is my little, sending out basically little haikus every day. And then all the rest of it is just responses from people hanging out on the SMS system. And there were some technical glitches. And so I couldn't see the SMSs, the responses, but the tech people could. I said, if you're not getting images, respond with no images. And so we have 3 or 4 spreads of no images. And I told everyone, I'm not reading news. I'm not looking at the news. And so one person sent me a headline from the New York Times every day. So there's this weird ambient New York Times thing going on. It's like, oh, it was a quiet, beautiful, comfortable place. And then the real world comes crashing in every couple of responses. And so when I was looking at this, I got it. I went to a cafe near my house. I spent about 3 hours just reading through everything. And I realized, man, context, again, obvious, but man, when you feel it, when you experience it, it's a different thing. Context affects intimacy tremendously. And the responses were crazy. These are all anonymous. Today was the day my mother died. No one's going to send me that over email or on Twitter. And I'm glad that this platform gave that person the ability to express himself in that way. I don't know what to reply to you, Craig, except keep walking. Weird that you won't get this in real time, but you will imagine people wishing you to keep walking. I wish I was walking now. Me too. As I went to sleep with the pulsing fog horns of the Bay Area, I remembered that in the morning I would wake to another moment from your walk. This picture of an elderly man watering his lawn or garden is actually what I needed right now. I've been going through a rough patch of self-doubt and depression, and it's weirdly comforting to look at this picture. So this was going on. This was pretty affecting for me, and I had this incredible account of my journey. And so I was reading through and I was marking it up, and you can see kind of on the right-hand page there, all these like pen marks and stuff. I was circling things, putting stars next to funny things, crossing out stuff that was extremely negative, and marking up where the questions were. And I went back to the questions, and I realized, I want to start responding to these as essays. So in my weekly newsletter, I started writing responses to all these questions that I found in the book. And then those responses grew into bigger essays. And those went to my other newsletter. This is the great thing about having newsletters, is you're never for want of a place to put stuff. And these essays, these bigger essays in the newsletter, kind of grew into other things, like articles for Wired. I wrote about my glorious almost disconnected, not a cave person, almost disconnected, boredom of my walk in Japan. And then from there, I realized there were all these subculture things that I was experiencing and witnessing, like all the really old people running cafes. This guy's a ballroom dancer. He's been running his cafe for a very long time. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's incredible. He's obsessed with Canada. His wife went to Canada once, and that was it. They were hooked. She traveled the world, and she went to Canada, and she came home, and she said, Canada's the best. He said, all right, I believe you. Let's rearrange our entire life around Canada. That makes sense. And I wrote about that for Eater. I wrote about this crazy, incredible culture of stuff that in 15 years is going to be gone. All of these people are going to be gone unless we reach the singularity, and then they can live forever running their Canadian cafes. But that's probably not going to happen in 15 years. And so I wrote this article. I walked 600 miles across Japan for pizza toast, which is very delicious. I recommend visiting Japan, but not only for pizza toast. And the funny thing is that I said this all started from a moment of intense exhaustion. But strangely, I was not exhausted walking 600 miles. In fact, I was energized. I was light. It was probably the most creatively fecund period ever in my life. I created more, I felt more alive, I felt more connected to people than at any other point ever of my being alive. And the SMS system was a big part of it. It came with a bunch of benefits. Bigger, more thoughtful loops. This is kind of the critical one. So many of the loops of communication that we are stuck in, or that we use, say on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, you go into Instagram and the width of a loop on something like Instagram is seconds. You publish and seconds later you're getting feedback, minutes, hours. It's very, very short. And here I was working with the SMS system where there's a lead of about 2 months before I saw the responses. And then from there, I'm still responding via essay over time. I'll probably be responding for a year after the walk. There's an obvious contract to this system, and I think this gets undervalued in a lot of the things we use. The contract in this system was very clear. You subscribe to this, and then we are done when the walk is done. Don't worry, you're not stuck in this if you don't want to be. I wasn't pulled out of the moment in my walk, and yet I wasn't in a cave. We were leveraging the incredible global network access that the internet provides. This is an incredible thing that's out there to be used. SMS turned out to be really intimate and unexpected. That was a great platform to use. And people seemed genuinely delighted. And really, the big takeaway is not that I expect all of you to go for 43-day walks, throughout Europe or America or South America or wherever you may be from. Although if you can do that, I recommend it. It's kind of an interesting experience. Use it as a platform. Be really intentional about it. But inside your organization or your community, think about the size of your loops. Think about what you can do. Should we be using asynchronous or real-time communication for these projects we're working on? Design comps, for example. What if you had everyone put their design comps on Monday up on a board, and then no one was allowed to respond to them until Wednesday? It probably changed the way you thought about those comps. You don't have to do that all the time, but it might be kind of a fun experiment to bake in as part of your process. Real-time versus asynchronous. So I guess we'll leave it there. I think there's only one more slide that just said thank you. So we're so close. But yeah, thank you all today for listening to these kind of strange experiments. I know they're not immediately applicable to everything that you're doing, but I hope that these two books, the Flipboard for iPhone book and this SMS book, offer archetypes for going forward and working on your teams, thinking about the boundaries of communication, what it means to put edges around a project, and what value that brings to the team, and thinking about what tools are you using. It's not about saying we need fewer tools in the world, because that's not going to happen. We're always going to make more tools. But it's about accounting for the tools that we're using and taking a moment to go, okay, we've got Slack, we've got Jira, we've got this, we've got that. Do we need all of these things at all times for every project at every moment? Yes and no, maybe, maybe not. So thank you all for showering and getting dressed today. It's a big deal. That's worth more than I think we sometimes give it credit for. And I look forward to spending the day together and exploring these ideas and more with this incredible community. So thank you.